7 years had passed since that nightmare-filled night when Daniel had clung to his father, afraid he would disappear again. Now, at 10 years old, both boys had grown into remarkable young men who bore clear resemblances to Marcus that went far beyond genetics. David had inherited his father's love for building things and could often be found in the garage with Marcus, learning to use tools and asking endless questions about how everything worked. Daniel had developed his father's quiet observation skills and love of reading, often curled up in Marcus's lap as they read books together. Marcus had kept his promise. He had been there for every important moment since that day. School plays, soccer games, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. He had moved back into the house he once shared with Sarah, though they maintained separate bedrooms while slowly rebuilding their relationship. Trust, Marcus had learned, was much harder to rebuild than it was to destroy. The family had established new traditions and routines. Saturday mornings were for pancakes that Marcus made while the boys helped and made messes. Sunday afternoons were for family walks in the same park where Marcus had first played with his sons. Evenings were for homework help, where Marcus discovered that both boys had inherited his analytical mind, though they applied it in different ways. But the conversation Marcus had been dreading finally came on a quiet Tuesday evening. The boys were doing homework at the kitchen table when David looked up suddenly. "Dad, why don't we have any pictures of you when we were babies?" David asked with the directness of a 10-year-old who had been thinking about something for a while. Marcus felt his heart stop. Beside David, Daniel looked up from his math worksheet, equally curious. Sarah, who had been preparing dinner, went very still. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though he knew exactly what David meant. "Tyler at school showed us pictures of his dad holding him when he was born," Daniel said quietly. "And Emma has pictures of her dad feeding her bottles when she was little. But we don't have any pictures like that. Why weren't you there when we were babies?" Sarah looked at Marcus across the kitchen, her eyes filled with understanding and support. They had known this day would come, had prepared for it, but that didn't make it any easier. Marcus sat down at the table between his sons, his heart racing. "Boys, that's a very important question and you deserve an honest answer. But it's a complicated story about grown-up mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" David asked, leaning forward with interest. Marcus took a deep breath. "When you were born, you looked different than Mama and I expected. You had blonde hair and blue eyes, and Mama and I both have dark hair and dark eyes." "So?" Daniel said, confused. "We know we look different. Kids at school sometimes ask about it." "Well, back then I didn't understand that children could look different from their parents and still be their parents' real children. I thought that because you looked different you might not be my sons." Both boys stared at him with confusion that broke Marcus's heart. "But we are your sons," David said, as if this should have been obvious. "Yes, you are. You absolutely are my sons, and I love you more than anything in the world. But I didn't understand that when you were babies. So I made the worst mistake of my life. I left." The kitchen was completely silent except for the sound of Sarah's quiet crying at the counter. "You left us?" Daniel asked in a small voice. Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, I did. And it was wrong. It was the worst thing I've ever done, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." David's face was scrunched up in confusion and hurt. "But why? Even if we looked different, why didn't you want us?" "It wasn't that I didn't want you," Marcus said desperately. "I was confused and scared and ignorant. I didn't know that families could look different from each other. I thought Mama had lied to me, and I was so hurt that I couldn't think straight." "Mama never lies," Daniel said firmly, moving closer to his mother. "No, she doesn't. Mama told me the truth, but I didn't believe her, and because I didn't believe her, I missed the first 3 years of your lives. I missed your first steps, your first words, your first birthdays. I missed everything, and I can never get those years back." Both boys were quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, David asked the question Marcus had been dreading most. "Did you leave because we're white and you're black?" Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, that's exactly why I left. And I'm so ashamed of that, boys. I'm ashamed that I let something as meaningless as skin color keep me from loving my sons. But skin color doesn't matter, Daniel said, echoing lessons they had learned at school and at home. You're right. It doesn't matter at all. But I was too ignorant to understand that. I hurt you and Mama because I couldn't see past the color of your skin to the love that was right in front of me. Sarah finally joined them at the table, sitting next to Daniel and taking his hand. Boys, what Daddy did was wrong, but he learned from his mistake, and he's been trying to make up for it ever since. He's been a wonderful father to you for 7 years now. Are you going to leave again? David asked, his voice shaky. Never, Marcus said firmly, reaching out to take both boys' hands. I will never leave you again. I promise you that with my whole heart. Daniel was quiet for a long time, then asked, Do you think we're beautiful even though we look different? From you? Marcus broke down completely. You are the most beautiful boys in the world. Your blonde hair is beautiful. Your blue eyes are beautiful. Your skin is beautiful. Everything about you is perfect, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. We look like you in other ways, Daniel said thoughtfully. I write with my left hand like you. And David has your stubborn chin. Marcus laughed through his tears. Yes, you do look like me in many ways. And you both have my love for learning and asking questions. David was still processing everything. So you missed our birthdays for 3 years? Yes, I did. And you didn't help Mama when we were babies? No, I didn't. Mama did everything by herself, which was very hard for her. Both boys looked at their mother with new respect and love. Mama, you took care of us all by yourself? Daniel asked. Grandma helped, Sarah said softly. But yes, I took care of you by myself for a while. David suddenly got up and hugged Sarah tightly. I'm sorry Daddy wasn't there to help you, Mama. Daniel joined the hug, and soon Marcus was part of it too. All 4 of them crying and holding each other. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Marcus and Sarah sat on the porch talking. Do you think they understand? Marcus asked. They understand that you made a mistake and that you're sorry, Sarah said. But they're 10 years old. They won't fully understand the magnitude of what happened until they're older. What if they hate me when they really understand what I did? Sarah was quiet for a moment. They might be angry. They might have questions you can't answer. But Marcus, you've shown them who you really are for 7 years now. You've been there for them, loved them, supported them. That has to count for something. Marcus nodded, but the worry remained. I just hope that someday they can forgive me completely. They already have, Sarah said softly. Children forgive more easily than adults. The real question is whether you can forgive yourself. Marcus looked through the window at the family photos that now covered the walls. Pictures of him with the boys at baseball games, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. 7 years of memories that helped heal the wound of the 3 years he had lost. I'm working on it, Marcus said. Every day I'm with them, every moment I get to be their father, helps me forgive myself a little more. Inside the house, David and Daniel were supposed to be sleeping, but they were whispering in the dark. Do you think Daddy really won't leave? Again? Daniel asked. I don't think so, David said. He seems really sorry, and he's been here every day for as long as I can remember. I'm glad he came back, Daniel said sleepily. Me too, David agreed. Even if he did make a big mistake, I'm glad he's our daddy now. And in that moment, in the innocent forgiveness of children who had known nothing but love from their father for 7 years, Marcus finally began to forgive himself. The road had been long, the lessons painful, but love had found a way to heal what ignorance had broken. His family was whole, scarred but stronger, and that was worth everything. 2 weeks passed before Sarah called Marcus. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, conversations with her mother and watching her sons play, wondering if she was being selfish by keeping them from their father or protective by keeping their father from them. David and Daniel had asked about the man in the backyard several times, their curiosity natural and innocent. Marcus, Sarah said when he answered the phone immediately, as if he had been waiting by it, I've made a decision. Marcus's heart pounded. What did you decide? The boys can meet you. But there are conditions. Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty underneath. We'll start with supervised visits. Short ones. And if at any point I think this is hurting them, it stops. No arguments, no court battles, do you understand? Yes, Marcus said quickly. Whatever you think is best. When can I see them? Saturday afternoon at the park on Maple Street. 1 hour. I'll be there the entire time. Sarah paused. And Marcus, I'm going to tell them who you are. They deserve the truth even if it's complicated. Saturday came slowly for Marcus and too quickly for Sarah. She had spent the week trying to explain to 2 3-year-olds that they were going to meet their daddy, the one they had asked about so many times. David had been excited, asking endless questions about what daddies do and whether this daddy would like trucks. Daniel had been more cautious, staying close to his mother and watching her face for signs of whether this was good or scary. Marcus arrived at the park 30 minutes early, sitting on a bench and watching other families play together. He saw fathers pushing their children on swings, teaching them to catch balls, wiping tears when they fell, all the things he should have been doing for the past 3 years, all the moments he had chosen to miss. When Sarah arrived with the twins, Marcus's breath caught. They were bigger than they had seemed at the DNA testing facility, real little, boys instead of toddlers. David ran ahead, fearless and curious, while Daniel held tightly to his mother's hand. Both of them stared at Marcus with the intense curiosity of children meeting someone new. Boys, Sarah said, kneeling down to their level. Do you remember what we talked about? This is Marcus. This is your daddy. David stepped forward boldly. Are you really our daddy? He asked, tilting his head exactly the way Marcus remembered doing as a child. Marcus's throat was tight with emotion. Yes, I am. I'm your daddy and I'm very happy to meet you. Daniel stayed behind his mother, peeking around her leg. Where were you? He asked in a small voice. The question Marcus had been dreading came from his quiet, observant son. How could he explain to a 3-year-old that he had been too ignorant and proud to be there? I was away, Marcus said gently. But I'm here now, and I want to get to know you both. Sarah watched the interaction carefully, ready to intervene if either boy seemed upset or confused. But David was already chattering excitedly about the playground equipment, asking if Marcus wanted to see him go down the big slide. Daniel remained cautious but curious, his eyes never leaving his father's face. They spent the hour at the playground, with Marcus pushing the boys on swings and watching them climb the jungle gym. He was amazed by their different personalities. David was bold and adventurous, wanting to try everything and not afraid of getting dirty. Daniel was thoughtful and careful, preferring to watch before trying something new. Daddy, watch this, David called out, hanging upside down from the monkey bars. The word daddy hit Marcus like a physical blow. This little boy, who had every right to reject him, was already calling him daddy as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. That's amazing, David, you're very strong, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel had warmed up slightly, allowing Marcus to help him across the stepping stones. When the little boy slipped and Marcus caught him, Daniel looked up and smiled shyly. Thank you, Daddy. 2 simple words, but they meant everything to Marcus. His sons were giving him a gift he didn't deserve, their immediate, innocent acceptance. As the hour drew to a close, Sarah called the boys over. Time to go home, she said. Do we have to? David protested. I want to play with Daddy more. Can Daddy come to our house? Daniel asked hopefully. Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing the longing in his eyes. Maybe another time, she said carefully. Daddy will visit again soon. Promise? David asked, looking directly at Marcus. I promise, Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. As they walked back to Sarah's car, Marcus felt a mixture of joy and heartbreak. Joy at finally meeting his sons and seeing how wonderful they were, and heartbreak at realizing how much he had missed. These beautiful, intelligent, loving children had grown and developed without him. They had learned to walk, talk, and think without their father there to witness it. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly to Sarah as she buckled the boys into their car seats. Sarah nodded but didn't smile. "This was for them, not for you," she said firmly. "They deserved the chance to meet their father." Over the following weeks, the visits continued, always supervised, always with Sarah present but gradually lasting longer. Marcus began to learn his son's personalities, their likes and dislikes, their fears and dreams. David loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up. Daniel preferred books and art, spending hours drawing pictures of the family he was getting to know. The boys adapted to having a father with the resilience of childhood, but Marcus could see the questions in their eyes. Why hadn't he been there before? Why didn't he live with them like other daddies? Sarah answered their questions honestly but gently, explaining that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and that Daddy was trying to make things better now. Marcus threw himself into being the father he should have been from the beginning. He read parenting books, researched child development, and tried to make up for lost time. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was always going to be playing catch-up, always going to be the father who wasn't there when it mattered most. One afternoon, while watching Daniel carefully color inside the lines of a dinosaur coloring book, Marcus realized something that made his chest tight with regret. Daniel was left-handed, just like Marcus had been as a child. It was such a small thing, but it represented all the genetic traits, personality quirks, and family resemblances that Marcus had been too blind to see. How many other similarities had he missed by refusing to look past their skin color? "Daddy, you're sad," Daniel observed, looking up from his coloring. Marcus was startled. His quiet son was also perceptive, another trait they shared. "I'm not sad, buddy, I'm just thinking." Thinking about what? How could Marcus explain to a 3-year-old that he was thinking about all the ways he had failed as a father? "I'm thinking about how lucky I am to have you and David as my sons." Daniel smiled and went back to his coloring, accepting the simple explanation. But Marcus knew that someday, when his sons were older, they would ask harder questions. They would want to know why he hadn't been there for their births, their first steps, their first words. They would want to understand how a father could abandon his children based on the color of their skin. That night, Marcus called Sarah. "I want to tell them the truth," he said without preamble. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew. "I want them to know why I wasn't there. Not now, but someday, when they're old enough to understand. I don't want them to grow up thinking it was their fault or that I didn't want them." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, that's a conversation that could hurt them deeply. Learning that your father rejected you because of how you look, that's not something children get over easily, I know. But I also know that secrets have a way of coming out, and I'd rather they hear it from me. I want them to understand that it was my ignorance and my mistake, not anything wrong with them." Sarah sighed. "They're too young now. But yes, someday, they'll need to know. And Marcus, when that day comes, you better make sure they understand that what you did was wrong. You better make sure they know that their skin color is beautiful and that any man who would reject them for it isn't worth knowing." "Even if that man is their father?" Marcus asked quietly. "Especially if that man is their father." The conversation haunted Marcus for days. He looked at his sons playing together, their blonde hair catching the sunlight, and tried to imagine how he could ever explain his actions to them. How could he tell them that he had looked at their beautiful faces and seen only betrayal? How could he make them understand that his rejection had nothing to do with them and everything to do with his own failures? 3 months into the visits, Daniel had a nightmare. Sarah called Marcus at work, something she had never done before. "He's asking for you," Sarah said, her voice strained. "He woke up crying and asking for his daddy. I don't know what to do." Marcus left work immediately and drove to Sarah's mother's house. He found Daniel curled up on the couch, his face red and puffy from crying. When he saw Marcus, he ran over and threw his small arms around his father's legs. "Daddy, I had a scary dream," Daniel sobbed. Marcus picked up his son, feeling the weight and warmth of him, and held him close. It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here now. Tell me about your dream. I dreamed that you went away again and never came back, Daniel whispered against Marcus's chest. The words broke Marcus's heart. His son, Hubei. Sarah stood in the backyard, holding her sons close to her side, staring at the man who had once been her entire world. 3 years of hurt, anger, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had built a life without him, learned to be strong for her children, and convinced herself that she was better off alone. Now here he was, asking for a second chance she wasn't sure she could give. "Mama, who is this man?" David asked, looking up at his mother with innocent curiosity. Sarah's throat tightened. How could she explain to a 3-year-old that this was the father who had rejected him at birth? How could she tell her children that the man they had wondered about for so long was standing right in front of them? "Boys, why don't you go inside and ask Grandma for some juice?" Sarah said softly. "But we want to play more," Daniel protested. "Please, just for a few minutes. Mama needs to talk to this man." The twins reluctantly went inside, looking back curiously at Marcus. Once they were gone, Sarah turned to face him fully, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. "You want to make it right?" Sarah asked, her voice growing stronger. "Marcus, you didn't just leave me, you didn't just break my heart. You abandoned 2 innocent babies who never did anything wrong. You missed their first steps, their first words, their first birthdays. Daniel had pneumonia when he was 18 months old, and I sat in that hospital room alone, terrified he might die, while you were living your life pretending we didn't exist." Marcus felt physically sick. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "You made a choice based on ignorance and pride, and you stuck with it even when everyone begged you to reconsider. My mother called you when the boys were sick. My sister tried to reach you when I was struggling with postpartum depression. You changed your number and disappeared." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He had known Sarah was struggling, but he had convinced himself it wasn't his problem. He had blocked out any information about his former family, telling himself he was protecting himself from further pain. "I changed my number because it hurt too much," Marcus said weakly. "Every time someone called about you or the boys, it reminded me of what I thought I had lost." "What you thought you had lost?" Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "Marcus, you didn't lose anything. You threw it away. There's a difference." Marcus knew she was right. He had no excuse for his behavior, no justification that made sense now that he knew the truth. He had acted out of pain and ignorance, but that didn't excuse the damage he had caused. "I know I don't deserve another chance," Marcus said. "But those boys deserve to know their father. They deserve to have a dad who will love them and protect them and be there for them. I can't change the past 3 years, but I can be the father they need from now on." Sarah laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple? You think you can just show up after 3 years and everything will be fine? Marcus, they don't even know who you are. To them, you're a stranger. They've never needed you before, so why should they need you now?" "Because every child needs their father," Marcus said desperately. "Because I love them, even though I was too stupid to see it before. Because I want to teach them to ride bikes and help them with homework and be there when they're scared or hurt." "Where was that love when they were babies?" Sarah asked. "Where was it when David took his first steps and you weren't there to see it? Where was it when Daniel said mama for the first time and I cried because there was no daddy there to hear it?" Marcus had no answer. The truth was that his love for his sons had been buried under layers of hurt, pride, and ignorance. It had taken him 3 years to dig through those layers and find it again. Sarah began to pace back and forth across the small yard. "Do you know what it's like to be a single mother of twins? Do you know how many nights I stayed up wondering if I was doing everything wrong? How many times I had to be both mother and father to those boys?" "I can only imagine," Marcus said quietly. "No, you can't imagine," Sarah snapped. "Because you chose not to be there. You chose to miss all of it. And now you want to waltz back in because some DNA test told you what your heart should have known all along." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. "Sarah, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you and the boys in ways I can never fully understand. But I'm here now, and I want to do right by all of you." Sarah stopped pacing and looked at him with exhausted, eyes. It's not about what you want anymore, Marcus. It's about what's best for David and Daniel. They have a stable life now. They have routines and security. They don't need the confusion of a father who might decide to leave again when things get difficult. I would never leave them again, Marcus said firmly. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I swear on everything I hold dear that I would never abandon my sons again. Your sons? Sarah's voice was sharp. Now they're your sons? 3 years ago you wanted nothing to do with them. What changed, Marcus? What suddenly made you realize they were worth knowing? Marcus knew the question was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. I learned about genetics. I found out that black parents could have white children. I realized I might have been wrong. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You learned about genetics? Marcus, you're an engineer. You went to college. How did you not know basic biology? I don't know, Marcus admitted. I was so hurt and angry that I couldn't think straight. I saw those babies and all I could think was that you had betrayed me. I didn't consider any other possibilities. So you destroyed our family based on your assumptions, Sarah said coldly. You threw away 3 people who loved you because you couldn't be bothered to do 5 minutes of research or ask for a simple test. Marcus hung his head. Yes. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching her sons through the kitchen window as they ate cookies with their grandmother. They were happy children despite everything they had been through. They were resilient and loving, and they deserved better than a father who might disappoint them. Even if I wanted to let you back into their lives, Sarah said finally, I don't know how. They don't know you. You're a stranger to them. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that the man who's been absent their entire life is suddenly their daddy? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. Maybe we could start slowly. Maybe I could just spend time with them, let them get to know me. We don't have to tell them who I am right away. Sarah shook her head. I won't lie to my children, Marcus. They've had enough confusion in their lives. If you want to be part of their lives, they need to know who you are and why you haven't been there. Then help me figure out how to tell them, Marcus pleaded. Help me find a way to be the father they deserve without causing them more pain. Sarah looked at him for a long time, searching his face for any sign that he might disappoint her children the way he had disappointed her. What she saw was genuine remorse, deep regret, and something that might have been love. But she had been hurt too badly to trust easily. I need time to think, Sarah said finally. This isn't just about you and me anymore. Those boys are my priority, and I won't do anything that might hurt them. Marcus nodded, understanding that this was more than he deserved. I'll wait as long as you need, but Sarah, please don't let my mistakes cost our sons their father forever. The DNA testing facility was sterile and cold, nothing like the warm hospital where the twins had been born. Marcus arrived first, his hands sweating as he filled out paperwork. He had barely slept in the week leading up to this appointment, consumed by anxiety about what he might discover and what he had already lost. Sarah arrived with the twins, now 3 years old and full of energy. David was carrying a small toy truck, making engine noises as he pushed it along the waiting room chairs. Daniel clung to his mother's leg, shy around strangers. When they walked in, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. They were beautiful children, healthy and happy despite growing up without their father. The boys didn't recognize him, of course. To them, he was just another stranger in a room full of strangers. But Marcus studied their faces, looking for signs of himself that he had been too blind to see before. David had his stubborn chin. Daniel had the same way of observing everything quietly, just like Marcus had as a child. Sarah avoided looking at Marcus directly, focusing instead on keeping the boys calm and entertained. She looked older, more tired than he remembered, but still beautiful. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a dress that was neat but clearly inexpensive. Marcus realized she was probably struggling financially as a single mother, and guilt washed over him. The nurse called them in for the tests, simple cheek swabs that would determine the truth Marcus should have sought years ago. The boys were curious but cooperative, treating it like a game when the nurse rubbed the cotton swab inside their mouths. "All done," the nurse said cheerfully. "Results will be ready in 3 to 5 business days. We'll call you both." As they gathered their things to leave, Daniel dropped his coloring book. Marcus bent down to pick it up at the same time as the little boy reached for it. Their eyes met for the first time, and Marcus saw his own eyes looking back at him. Daniel smiled shyly and said, "Thank you, mister." Marcus's throat tightened. "You're welcome," he managed to say. Sarah quickly took Daniel's hand and hurried out of the building, not saying a word to Marcus. He watched through the window as she buckled the boys into their car seats, her movements quick and efficient. She had learned to do everything alone, and Marcus realized he was the reason why. The wait for results felt like the longest week of Marcus's life. He couldn't concentrate at work, barely ate, and spent hours imagining different scenarios. What if the tests confirmed they weren't his children? What if he had been right all along and Sarah really had betrayed him? But deep in his heart, he already knew the truth. Those boys were his sons, and he had thrown them away. When the phone finally rang, Marcus answered before the first ring finished. "Mr. Williams, this is Dr. Martinez from the DNA testing facility. I have your results." Marcus closed his eyes and held his breath. "The tests confirm that you are the biological father of both David and Daniel Williams. The probability of paternity is 99.9%. The phone slipped from Marcus's hand and clattered to the floor. He sank into his chair as the reality hit him like a physical blow. They were his sons. His beautiful, innocent sons, whom he had abandoned because of his own ignorance and pride. Sarah had never betrayed him. She had been faithful, loving, and honest, and he had destroyed their family over his own stupidity. Marcus picked up the phone. The doctor was still talking, explaining genetic inheritance and how rare but possible it was for black parents to have white-appearing children. Marcus barely heard the words. All he could think about was Sarah's face in the hospital, the confusion and hurt when he had accused her of cheating. He thought about her tears, her pleas for him to stay and work things out. That evening, Marcus drove to Sarah's mother's house again. This time he got out of the car. His legs felt unsteady as he walked up the sidewalk he had once known so well. The same flower garden Sarah's mother tended was blooming along the walkway. Everything looked the same, but Marcus knew that everything had changed forever. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Sarah's mother answered, and her face immediately hardened when she saw him. "What do you want, Marcus?" Mrs. Johnson asked coldly. "Haven't you done enough damage?" "Please, Mrs. Johnson, I need to talk to Sarah. I got the test results." "And what do those results tell you that 2 years of thinking couldn't figure out?" she asked, her voice sharp with anger. "That Sarah never lied to you? That those beautiful boys are your children? That you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you?" Marcus hung his head. "You're right. I was wrong about everything. Please, I just need to tell her I'm sorry." Mrs. Johnson stared at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "She's in the backyard with the boys, but Marcus, if you hurt her again, if you disappoint those children, I'll never forgive you, and neither will they." Marcus walked through the house he remembered well, past the kitchen where Mrs. Johnson had taught him to make her famous cornbread, past the living room where he had asked for Sarah's hand in marriage. The back door was open and he could hear children's laughter outside. In the yard, Sarah was pushing the twins on a small swing set. David was laughing loudly as he swung higher, while Daniel preferred a gentler pace. Sarah was smiling, but Marcus could see the sadness in her eyes even from a distance. She had learned to find joy in small moments while carrying the weight of his abandonment. "Higher, Mama! Higher!" David called out. "Be careful, baby," Sarah said, giving him another push. "Mama, why is that man watching us?" Daniel asked, pointing at Marcus. Sarah turned and saw him standing by the door. The color drained from her face, and for a moment neither of them moved. The boys stopped swinging and looked between their mother and the stranger with curiosity. Marcus stepped forward, slowly, his hands shaking. "Sarah, I got the test results." She lifted her chin, trying to look stronger than she felt. "And?" "They're my sons," Marcus said, his voice breaking. David and Daniel are my sons, and I threw them away. I threw our family away because I was too ignorant and proud to consider that I might be wrong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. The boys climbed down from their swings and moved closer to their mother, sensing the tension in the air. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Marcus continued. "I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But Sarah, I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I thought you had betrayed me, part of my heart still belonged to you. And now I know the truth, and I hate myself for what I've done." "You should hate yourself," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite her tears. "Do you know what the last 3 years have been like? Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep wondering what I did wrong? How many times the boys asked about their daddy, and I had to make excuses for why you weren't here?" Marcus felt each word like a knife to his heart. "I know I can't undo it. I know I can't take back the pain I caused. But please, Sarah, give me a chance to make it right. Let me be the father these boys deserve. Let me be the husband you deserved all along." 2 years passed like a dark cloud over Marcus's life. He had built walls around his heart so high that no one could reach him. His apartment remained sparse and cold, with only the basic furniture he needed to survive. Photos of his old life with Sarah were packed away in boxes he never opened. He had convinced himself that forgetting was the only way to heal. His work became his entire world. Marcus threw himself into engineering projects with an intensity that worried his colleagues. He volunteered for overtime, took on extra assignments, and rarely took vacation days. The company promoted him twice in 2 years, impressed by his dedication, but they didn't understand that work was his escape from the pain that still lived in his chest. At night, Marcus would sometimes find himself driving past his old neighborhood, without meaning to. Once he saw Sarah pushing a stroller with 2 toddlers walking beside her. Even from a distance, he could see the blonde hair catching the sunlight. His heart clenched, but he quickly drove away, telling himself he was better off without the constant reminder of her betrayal. Sarah had moved in with her mother to save money and get help with the twins. David and Daniel were growing into energetic, curious boys who asked endless questions about everything they saw. They were smart, funny, and loving children who brought joy to everyone except the one person who should have loved them most. "Mama, where's our daddy?" David asked one evening, as Sarah tucked them into bed. The question she had been dreading finally came, and she felt her heart break all over again. "Daddy had to go away," Sarah said softly, stroking his blonde hair. "But Mama loves you very much." "Will he come back?" Daniel asked, his blue eyes wide with hope. Sarah couldn't answer. She kissed both boys goodnight and went to her room, where she cried quietly into her pillow. How could she explain to her children that their father had rejected them before they were old enough to even know his name? Meanwhile, Marcus had started dating again. His friends and co-workers encouraged him, saying it was time to move on. He went through the motions with several women, but his heart remained locked away. None of them could reach the part of him that had once loved so deeply it hurt. He was polite, took them to nice restaurants, and always ended things before they could get serious. One evening, Marcus was having dinner with Janet, a teacher he had been seeing for a few months. She was kind, intelligent, and patient with his emotional distance. As they talked about their day, she mentioned something that made him stop chewing. "I had the most interesting lesson today about genetics," Janet said, cutting her chicken. "We were talking about how traits are passed down from parents to children. Did you know that 2 black parents can actually have a white child? It's rare, but it happens when both parents carry recessive genes." Marcus felt like the world had stopped spinning. "What did you say?" Janet looked up, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "Oh, I was teaching about genetics. Sometimes children can look completely different from their parents because of recessive genes. It's actually fascinating. There was this case I read about where..." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. The fork fell from his hand and clattered onto his plate. His mind was racing, replaying every moment from that day in the hospital. He had been so sure, so absolutely certain that Sarah had cheated. The thought that there might be another explanation had never crossed his mind. "Marcus, are you okay?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Janet said, reaching across the table to touch his arm. I have to go, Marcus said, standing up abruptly. He threw money on the table and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Janet confused and alone. Marcus drove home in a daze, Janet's words echoing in his mind. 2 black parents could have a white child. It was possible. It was rare, but it was possible. He sat in his apartment until dawn, staring at the ceiling as everything he thought he knew crumbled around him. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. He spent the day researching genetics online, reading medical journals and case studies. With each article he read, the truth became clearer and more devastating. Sarah could have been telling the truth. The twins could actually be his sons. Marcus found stories of other families who had faced similar situations. Black couples who had white children and dealt with stares, questions, and accusations. He read about the science behind it, how certain combinations of genes could produce children who looked nothing like their parents. The evidence was overwhelming, and it destroyed him. How had he been so ignorant? How had he thrown away his family, based on assumptions? Marcus had always prided himself on being educated and logical, but when it came to the most important moment of his life, he had acted on emotion and ignorance. That evening, Marcus drove to Sarah's mother's house. He sat in his car across the street for an hour, trying to gather the courage to knock on the door. Through the living room window, he could see Sarah reading to 2 small boys who were cuddled up next to her on the couch. His sons. They were his sons, and he had abandoned them. The boys would be almost 3 years old now. They had learned to walk, talk, and probably ask for their daddy without understanding why he wasn't there. Marcus had missed their first steps, their first words, their first birthdays. He had missed everything because of his own ignorance and pride. As he watched, one of the boys ran to the window and pressed his face against the glass, looking out at the street. Marcus could see his features clearly now, and suddenly he saw himself. The shape of the boy's nose, the way he tilted his head, even his curious expression reminded Marcus of his own childhood photos. How had he missed it before? But Marcus couldn't bring himself to get out of the car. What would he say? How could he explain that he had abandoned his family because he didn't understand basic genetics? How could he ask for forgiveness for something so cruel and unforgivable? Instead, he drove home and called his lawyer. "I want to request a DNA test," Marcus said. His lawyer was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, it's been 2 years. Are you sure about this?" "I need to know the truth," Marcus said, though in his heart he already knew. The legal process began, and Sarah was notified. When she received the papers requesting DNA tests for the twins, she sat on her mother's couch and cried for an hour. After 2 years of silence, this was how Marcus chose to reach out. Not with an apology or a conversation, but with legal documents that implied he still doubted her faithfulness. Marcus Williams stood in the hospital corridor, his hands shaking as he stared at the twins through the nursery window. 2 perfect baby boys with blonde hair and blue eyes looked back at him, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. His wife, Sarah, lay exhausted in the recovery room, her dark hair spread across the pillow, waiting for him to return with joy and celebration. Instead, Marcus felt his world crumbling around him. He was a proud black man who had worked his way up from nothing. Growing up in Detroit, he had faced countless challenges, but his determination had carried him through college and into a successful career as an engineer. When he met Sarah, a beautiful black woman with dreams as big as his own, he knew he had found his soulmate. They had dated for 3 years before marrying in a ceremony surrounded by family and friends who celebrated their love. For 2 years, they had tried to have children. Sarah had suffered 2 miscarriages that left them both heartbroken and desperate. When she finally became pregnant with twins, they were overjoyed. Marcus had painted the nursery blue and yellow, built 2 cribs with his own hands, and read parenting books every night. He had imagined teaching his sons to play basketball, helping them with homework, and watching them grow into strong black men like himself. But now, staring at these blonde, blue-eyed babies, dark thoughts filled his mind. How could 2 black parents have white children? The only explanation that made sense to him was the one that broke his heart into pieces. Sarah must have been unfaithful, the woman he trusted with his life. The woman he had shared his deepest fears and dreams with had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Marcus walked back to Sarah's room, his footsteps heavy. She looked up at him with tired but happy eyes, expecting to see joy on his face. Instead, she saw something that frightened her. His expression was cold, distant, nothing like the warm, loving man she had married. "Marcus, what's wrong? Are the babies okay?" Sarah asked, trying to sit up despite her exhaustion. He stood at the foot of her bed, his arms crossed. "The babies are fine, Sarah. They're perfect, actually. Perfect little white babies." Sarah's face showed confusion. "What do you mean, Marcus? You're scaring me." "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about," Marcus said, his voice rising. "Those babies don't look like either of us. They're white, Sarah, completely white. Blue eyes, blonde hair. How do you explain that?" Tears began forming in Sarah's eyes. "I don't understand what you're trying to say. They're our babies, Marcus, our sons." "Are they?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. "Because last time I checked, 2 black parents don't have white children. Unless—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah gasped, understanding finally hitting her. "You think I cheated? Marcus, how could you even think that? I love you. I've never been with anyone else since we met. Never." But Marcus had already made up his mind. The evidence was right there in the nursery. 2 white babies that couldn't possibly be his. He thought about all the times Sarah had worked late, all the business trips she had taken. Had she been lying to him all along? Had their entire marriage been built on deception? "I can't do this, Sarah," Marcus said, backing toward the door. "I can't pretend those are my children when I know they're not." "Marcus, please," Sarah cried, trying to get out of bed but too weak from delivery. "Don't leave us. Please, we can figure this out. There has to be an explanation." But Marcus was already walking away. He heard Sarah calling his name, heard her sobbing, but he didn't turn back. His heart was shattered, his trust destroyed. The family he had dreamed of was gone, replaced by what he saw as the ultimate betrayal. He went home to their small but comfortable house, the house they had bought, together with plans to fill it with children's laughter. The nursery door stood open, showing the cribs he had built and the mobile Sarah had chosen. Everything was ready for their son's arrival, but now Marcus couldn't bear to look at it. That night, Sarah's sister called him repeatedly. Her mother called. Even Sarah's best friend tried to reach him, but Marcus turned off his phone and sat in his living room staring at the wall. He had loved Sarah completely, trusted her with everything he had. The thought that she had betrayed him was killing him inside. The next morning, Marcus called his lawyer. He wanted a divorce, and he wanted it fast. When the lawyer asked about custody of the twins, Marcus was firm. "They're not my children," he said. "I want nothing to do with them." His lawyer tried to talk sense into him. "Marcus, even if you have doubts, don't you want a DNA test? Don't you want to be sure before you make such a permanent decision?" But Marcus refused. In his mind, no test was needed. The evidence was clear. 2 black parents could not have white children. It was impossible, and he wasn't going to waste time or money proving what he already knew. Word spread quickly through their community. Friends were shocked. Family members took sides. Sarah's family rallied around her, insisting that she had never been unfaithful. Marcus's family was divided, some supporting him while others begged him to reconsider. Marcus moved out of their house and into a small apartment across town. He threw himself into work, staying at the office until late every night to avoid going home to the empty apartment. His co-workers noticed the change in him. The once cheerful and optimistic man had become quiet and withdrawn. Meanwhile, Sarah struggled as a new mother of twins with no support from the man she loved. Her sister moved in to help, but nothing could fill the hole left by Marcus's absence. Every night she looked at her beautiful sons and wondered how the man who had claimed to love her could abandon them so easily. The divorce papers arrived a month later. Sarah signed them with tears in her eyes, knowing that fighting would only cause more pain. She named the boys David and Daniel, giving them Marcus's last name even though he wanted no part of their lives. She hoped that someday, somehow, he would come to his senses and want to know his sons.